What are some ridiculous history facts? In 1895, the entire state of Ohio had only 2 cars. Both cars managed to still smash into each other. Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. The first known political cartoon is Egyptian, and shows Hatshepsut, the only woman pharaoh, pegging her lover and chief architect Senmut. When Alexander the Great was a child, he was reprimanded by a teacher for wastefully throwing 2 whole fistfuls of rare incense into a sacrificial fire. When he was an adult and captured Gaza, which happened to be the prime agricultural source of the incense he wasted, he sent home 18 tons of it home to the same teacher as a gift. Karl Marx's great-great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour. Called !Marx. The entire country of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its efforts in World War II. It's still on their flag. Former U.S. President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a U.S. president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired. But the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away. But not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the out of him with a cane. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 due to them thinking he was an infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world after the price of Russian vodka couldn't cover their deal for Pepsi products. So they traded 17 submarines, a frigate, a cruiser, and a destroyer for a trade deal. Fun fact: the president of PepsiCo at the time told the National Security Advisor, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you are." Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, Freud, and Tito were all living in the same area of Vienna in 1913. American military members were also killed during the nuclear bombings of Japan. When American High Command was informed of their presence, their response was something like, "Targets remain unchanged." Montenegro technically was in war with Japan for 101 years and they signed a peace treaty in 2006. Montenegro was aligned with Russia in Russo-Japanese War and they declared war on Japan, but they forgot to peace. In 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared while swimming in the ocean. He was presumed drowned. So naturally that year we named a swim center after him in memoriam. Edit. Added his name. Which I meant to do when I wrote the post, but obviously my brain snapped midway through the sentence and I forgot it. Once FDR died, Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project. But when he found out, he subtly tried to tell Stalin they were working on something big. Stalin was like, "Yeah dude. I knew before you did." Since he had so many spies in America. Henry Cavendish. The man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle. And built a special castle. I think. He was incredibly introverted. So it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course. But I found this guy interesting. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Mael Bucktoothed or Mael Tusk, as his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and bucktoothed. They decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktooth had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men. But alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch. After the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktooth pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. There used to be bread stamps burned into a cooked loaf of bread, to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat flour. But some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker-specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread, if I remember correctly. Before Abraham Lincoln became a politician, he was a champion wrestler. With more than 300 bouts under his belt, Lincoln only lost 1 match in his career and was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. Herostratus is the guy who burned down the Temple of Artemis. The only reason he did it was to have his name written down in history. Hannibal's defeat of the Romans at Lago Trasimeno. By leaving soldiers to light fires in the hills, he created the illusion that his army was 3 days' march away, when tens of thousands of men were actually concealed in the hills just above the lake. The Romans were surprised on the shore and trapped between the onslaught and the water. In their armor, half of the 30,000 Roman troops were either killed in battle or drowned in the lake. 5,000 were captured and the other 10,000 staggered back to Rome, creating panic that the greatest army in the world had just been handed there by a Carthaginian upstart. It was the greatest ambush in military history. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day, July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of them both signing the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by about 5 hours." The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during WW2 claimed no human casualties. But it did kill an elephant. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle, because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. When the Romans laid siege to the Misera, a real place weirdly enough, they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Themyscians released bears into the tunnels. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt. And other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. There are literally entire books of anecdotes of this sort on Ben Franklin. That man was the Og of trolling. He was so good at trolling under the pen name of a female, Silence Dogood. He received several marriage proposals. Only then did he reveal her true identity. The state of Washington was named Washington instead of Columbia so that it wouldn't be confused with the District of Columbia, as it was commonly known at the time. As St. Lawrence was roasted to death on a gridiron, he is said to have remarked to his torturers, "I am cooked on this side. Turn me over." St. Lawrence is the patron saint of cooks and comedians. The Massachusetts colony banned celebrating Christmas. During that time period many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress then go door to door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle. So the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state. But didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis. So the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that. But no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license, I can't remember which, and were required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though.